types. And they found that where they would have expected a 64% contribution of the farm trout, in fact there was only about a 5% contribution. So much more limited impact than you might expect from the pure numbers involved. And that's not surprising given, as I mentioned earlier, the much lower survival and reproductive success of farm trout. Okay, the impact is less than you might expect, but does that mean we don't have to worry about it? Well, no, because the longer stocking takes place, the more the impact will be. It is a cumulative effect. It's slow, but it increases. And in Spain, they've measured it as something like a 1% increase 1% increase per year. So in other words, the sooner action is taken to prevent this detrimental change, the more chance we have of recovering the situation. So taking a very average figure, and I emphasize this as a sort of across-the-board average, about 25% of native trout genetic diversity has been lost as a result of stocking. And you can either look at this in a pessimistic or an optimistic point of view. Bad that we've lost 25%, but good that there's still 75% remaining, so there's a chance of still actually doing something. So to avoid this detrimental effect, stocking with fertile farm-reared trout and non-native trout should not be undertaken. The only form of stocking should either be with sterile fish or with the offspring of native trout. This stocking with offspring of native trout is often referred to as supportive breeding, simply to differentiate it from other forms of stocking. Because often people talk about stocking and they mean quite radically different things. So it's important that each different type has a different name. So supportive breeding, as I say, is where the broodstock are taken from the local population each generation and the offspring reared in the hatchery and then introduced. And this, of course, avoids introducing non-native genes. It keeps domestication to a minimum because the trout are there for a minimum or just for a relatively short period of time. Now, while this sounds all very well in theory, again, there are a lot of problems, as Andy's already alluded to, in terms of supportive breeding. And it's very important that supportive breeding is only carried out where there's a recognized bottleneck to production. You have to know what the problem is. It may well be that there are no spawning grounds there and it's not possible to reinstate them. You can get round that bottleneck by rearing the hatchery to an earlier stage, putting them out if there's suitable nursery grounds. So it should be to overcome a specific bottleneck in a specific situation. And you should be able to actually have a greater success over the whole lifetime of the fish than if they'd been left to spawn in the wild. Now, sometimes people are very impressed by the great survival in the hatchery, but of course when those fish are put out into the wild, they don't do as well as the wild reared fish of equivalent age. And so it has to be an overall life cycle increase that you're obtaining through this supportive breeding, through this hatchery intervention. And interestingly, some experiments have been done in North America on rainbow trout there, and what they found was that where you had good habitat conditions, in the wild, the lifetime success was actually better than you could obtain through rearing them in the hatchery and then planting them out. But where there was poor habitat, you actually got improved survival over the entire lifetime with the hatchery intervention. So again, supportive breeding may be necessary in the short term, but the ideal way is to improve the habitat. Is there anything we can do then to restore the populations that have already been impacted by stocking? Well, when stocking ceases, the level of farm genes has been shown in a number of different studies to decline. And that's what you would expect. Individuals carrying farm genes have lower fitness. The genes are effectively selected against. But we can also use supportive breeding to increase the proportion of wild fish. And just very briefly to finish with, I'll give a couple of examples of this. One involves the Lough Erne system in Northern Ireland, very extensively stocked over a number of years, upwards of 1 million fish a year of various ages being put into that system after UDN decimated the stocks in the 60s. Now we looked at it after stocking had been going on for about 10 years, and about 8 million fish had been put in, and at that time we found that 21% of the angling catch were of directly stocked fish or hybrids with the wild fish. Now some people say, oh, well, the stocking has increased the catch by 21%. That's not necessarily so. Just because you have stocked fish in the catch doesn't mean the catch has increased. Those stocked fish may simply have replaced wild fish of an equivalent number, or worse, an even greater number. And looking at the rivers, at naturally produced hybrids, considerable variation among the rivers, but between 0 and 40% in the different rivers. So in spite of this large-scale stocking, there's still a relatively low level of impact. And the anglers in the Fermanagh area, in the Lough Erne area, decided they didn't really like all this stocking. They felt that, apart from anything else, the quality of the angling was declining. So they got together, raised money to set up a hatchery to raise native Erne fish. Unfortunately, the native Erne and the farm trout are genetically very different. And again, fortunately in Northern Ireland, there's only one source of farm trout at that time, so we knew what we'd been dealing with in the case of the farm trout. And so we carried out genetic typing for the hatchery to purely pick out the native Erne fish to be used for breeding. And the initial results indicate that the percentage of the farm genes in the Erne system is declining. Another situation where supported breeding has been used has been to restore pure marble trout populations in the Adriatic. The Adriatic marble trout populations were strongly integrated with trout from Northern Europe. But again, it's quite easy to tell the two apart there, and so supported breeding is underway to try and restore these pure trout populations. Just in conclusion then, what hopefully I've demonstrated, that there is extensive genetic variation within and among our trout populations. And that genetic variation is extremely important. It contributes to abundance, it contributes to the diversity that's so interesting in trout, and it's important for continued adaptation, as well as being this integral part of biodiversity. Now, some genetic diversity has been lost, no doubt about it, as a result of environmental changes, stocking, and so forth. But we've still a lot remaining, and so the important thing is to act now to conserve what remains. Thank you for your attention.